received all exhibits. I've reviewed all exhibits. Mr. Shum, I have to view the evidence in the light most favorable to you, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And all reasonable inferences must be found in favor of the state, correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And the elements of rape are that there was sexual intercourse or penetration, however slight, with an individual without consent.
That is correct, Your Honor.
Ms. Tangaro, did I misstate anything?
You did not.
Okay. Ms. Tangaro, argument?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, I obviously understand the case law surrounding preliminary hearings, and I understand your ability to look at credibility and the inferences at this stage in the process. I will note that there has been recent preliminary hearing case law. A case by the name of Murphy recently came out. I happen to know those facts well because it is my case. In that case, Judge Coram did not bind over sexual abuse of a child. The alleged victim actually took the stand and testified in that case, as did his mother. Judge Coram did not bind that case over. It was appealed by the state, and the Court of Appeals upheld the lack of bind over. So I do think that there is some movement potentially related to preliminary hearings. What is important here, Your Honor, are the factors in this case. So first of all, this is obviously a slightly delayed report. She goes, 4 days later and does the original interview. She does not want to move forward. I think the CAD call thing is really important. Either the CAD call is not telling the truth or she is not telling the truth. And my guess is the CAD call is correct, that on March 1st, she did call in and said she no longer wanted to pursue this. I think that is important. I do think it is very pivotal that she comes forward 3 hours after the Jake Retzlaff civil case hits the news. The important part of that, and you can see that in that article, prior to that article coming out, she never says anything about Mr. Kingston falling asleep. The AV in the Jake Retzlaff case basically says that Jake fell asleep and then woke up and was very aggressive. Suddenly, that is now this alleged victim's story after seeing that. I think that is very problematic. I want to note in her interview, I also think this is important. First of all, I think when we're looking at the circumstances, she goes back and forth and, right, I don't know what people think is everything but sex. But originally in this interview, she's saying, oh, we didn't do very much. And then suddenly it's, we did everything but sex. There's some question. She does say oral sex was performed on her. I believe the check mark on the SANE exam says that she performed oral sex on him. They're clearly disrobed down to underwear and bras. She says then, the story with Mr. Kingston falling asleep, she then got up, put on clothes, put on a sweatshirt, put on sweatshorts, and then came back to bed and essentially disrobes again. What if we are to understand what her very best friend in the world and roommate is saying, she actually came into her room after this event and said nothing? That makes no sense. So Parker leaves at 3 or whatever time that was, and she goes into the best friend's bedroom, says nothing, ultimately talks to a neighbor law enforcement officer who's never been interviewed, And then I think it's very compelling in her interview, her forensic interview. So because right after it happened, I really, in my mind, thought that I did something wrong. I thought, oh, that was my bad. I didn't. I don't know. And so I talked to my therapist about it, and I talked to a couple of people about it, and my therapist was like, no, that was not consensual. Anything that's no, anything that's an absence of, that's sexual assault. So we have this situation where she's not even clear about her involvement, whether there was consent or not. She has to be told. And I can guarantee you 100 out of 100 therapists would say something like this, but it doesn't make it so. And so for that reason, Your Honor, I think the government is relying heavily on those text messages between Kel and Parker. The truth was these two guys were trying to plan a date that day. It was the alleged victim, who called him over at 1 a.m. to hang out. I'm sorry. It's not.
I know.
It's a lot to take in with. So it was the alleged victim who called him over at that time and was obviously completely participatory, and even according to her, with much of the stuff. Then we have the interview with Mr. Kingston, where Mr. Kingston says this was all consensual. He goes in and fully cooperates with law enforcement. You have the 1102 from Kel, and they finally interviewed Kel after filing charges, saying, no, this is just dudes talking. It doesn't mean, even if we were talking about Kraken, it doesn't mean you're gonna go rape someone or have sex with them without their consent. That's a huge leap to think that's what those conversations meant. Lastly, we have an 1102 from a witness who reached out to me to let me know that the alleged victim had bragged about having sex with a BYU football player. What's really important about that, and I think evidence to help support that, is that kid, when Parker gets charged, so over a year later, he reaches out to the roommate / best friend and is like, hey, what do you know about this? And then just gets blocked. The government knows about that witness. They have not been interviewed by the government. Your Honor, I think taking all these things into consideration, this is a quintessential he said, she said case. I don't think there's enough for probable cause of rape. The psoriasis thing is important. It might be small, but it's the little things. If you're lying about the little things, what else that can or cannot be proven are you lying about? So this AV gets interviewed and says, oh, this was so traumatic it caused psoriasis. And yet she then details on TikTok a very detailed journey of her psoriasis journey, which started in 2024, prior to her meeting Mr. Kingston. And, I know the standards, I know all those things, but I do think this is one of those cases that Your Honor, as the gatekeeper, ought to take a very hard look at.
Thank you. Mr. Shum, do you have anything to say?